Adi Carmi, former Shabak officer, thank you so much for joining me today. We are seeing more and more influence by Hamas in the West Bank. How much concerned Israel should be?
I believe that Israel is doing everything to deal with this issue. Hamas is in terrible shape in Gaza. They are blocked by a very effective underground border barrier, and so the only action they can take against Israel is firing rockets, which could lead to conflict with Israel. Part of their preparations for such scenarios is raising the tensions in the West Bank, recruiting people, funding, and maximizing their options to extend future conflicts into the West Bank and Jerusalem.
But how do they do it? Because they sit in Gaza, or in Turkey, or in Lebanon, and the people in Judea and Samaria sit in Ramallah or Hebron or in Nablus. How do they do it?
There's a whole dimension which I refer to as personal relations. Prisoners freed in the Gilad Shalit deal, originally from the West Bank, Nablus for example, are now living in Gaza and are using their personal connections through family members and friends in the West Bank, highlighting religious ideology and their personal acquaintance to send messages through social media, or sometimes the mainstream media, and also to send money to help local cells to organize, to buy weapons, to train, etc. And we know for a fact that because the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service, thwarts about 500 terror attacks each year. I'm talking about shootings, placing IEDs, suicide attacks. I think this is unprecedented anywhere in the world, the sheer volume of activity in a place that size. The fact that we're able to prevent these attacks is because our people know this area inside out and can get to practically anyone in the West Bank. We use the intelligence that's coming from this dialogue between the West Bank and Gaza. And by the way, not only Gaza, they have headquarters outside of Israel. Some are based in Turkey, for example. And we can say for a fact that there are people operating from other countries like Lebanon that you have mentioned to recruit terrorists in the West Bank to carry out attacks.
But Adi, you gave the figure of 500 successful operations by the Israelis to stop such attacks, which mean that Hamas do not succeed. What is their alternative?
Our only option regarding Gaza is to be as tough as we possibly can. Personally, I have more than 30 years of experience in dealing with terror organizations, among them Hamas. So I saw that every time you take a step back and allow them to develop, for example, the airport in Dahania that we promoted and even helped them build, or the industrial zone, or the fact that Israel invested 200 million shekels to improve the Erez crossing to allow more people in, each and every time we did that, we found Hamas building up their military abilities, more effective terror attacks, extending the range from missile fire, and my personal thoughts after decades of working very closely in those areas is that we have to take baby steps with the hope that one day Hamas will be replaced as the ruling party in Gaza. Yes, Hamas was elected by the people in Gaza, and if there were elections to be held in the West Bank today, they would most likely win there too. And that's why Abbas postponed the elections that were scheduled to earlier this year. So, dealing with this type of enemy, you have to keep in mind that any compromise or goodwill gesture is seen as weakness, and that worries me. A month ago, Israel has allowed 10,000 workers from Gaza to enter Israel without receiving any information about the Israeli captives, for example. And now we hear that Hamas is flexing its muscles with a missile test last week. So you see, we made a concession, think it would ease the pressure and help families, and got a long-range missile test. Israel will have to change course in the future.
So it was someone smarter than me who said that you must be stupid to do over and over the same thing and expect a different outcome. Maybe Israel is stupid by doing the same thing over and over for 10, 15 years vis-a-vis Hamas and Gaza, expecting a different outcome. We had an operation in May. We changed nothing.
My answer will focus on the Israeli spirit. We are a life-seeking people, and unfortunately there are people on the other side that don't share this ideology. They encourage violence and terror. They idolize the terrorists by calling them shahid or martyrs. They idolize killing and the uncompromising way of thought. They don't recognize us or our right to exist. I'd like to say to our leaders, start thinking like a Hamas operative in Gaza. Get inside their mindset and look at the situation with their eyes.
So if we do that, what would we see different?
My answer, based on what the Palestinian terror groups say and do, it appears in the Hamas charter, is that there is absolutely no chance that under the rule of Hamas there will be any kind of long-term settlement with the State of Israel. Absolutely no chance.
מדינת ישראל תגיע לאיזשהו הסדר ארוך טווח, לאיזושהי רגיעה לאורך שנים עם הארגון הזה. אין שום סיכוי.
They see how this strategy of wearing Israel down and harming its economy will eventually lead them to taking over the entire country. That's their goal. 25 years ago, I had a meeting with senior Hamas leaders, and I can't forget this meeting. It was in the Ketziot prison with people who returned from exile in Lebanon, like Abd al-Aziz Rantisi, for example.
איך אפשר ללכת לאיזשהו דו-קיום? כאנשי מודיעין אמנם, אבל כאנשים שבאמת מחפשים...
After the Oslo Accords, we looked at them and tried to understand how we can make it work, how we can coexist. And they said to us, we seek peace. We want peace for the region, but only on one condition. Palestine will be under Sharia law, and the Jews will have minority rights. That's the only way.
כדי לקיים את דתם. זו הדרך היחידה שלנו.
Adi Carmi, they want Afghanistan in Gaza? That's what they want? They want Afghanistan in the West Bank?
אני חושב שהרבה מעבר
They see the Muslim Brotherhood and Sharia law as the only goal. So yes, I guess you can make this comparison.
אתה יודע מה? אולי אפשר להשוות את זה באמת לאפגניסטן.
So explain to me the average person in Ramallah, or in Nablus, or in Jenin, or in Hebron, living quite open life, able to do nearly everything, go to the cinema, go to a restaurant, you drive, etc., etc. Of course, it's not optimal life, and you have the Israelis near to you, but their life in the West Bank is much better than the life in Gaza. Why should they support Hamas if Hamas in the West Bank will be the same as Hamas in Gaza? They will have Afghanistan in the West Bank as well.
מאחר וכשמדברים על אמונה ומדברים על דת.
We are talking about beliefs in religion and the religious way of thought, which states that Islam should be the only religion ruling the world. That is the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not only about Israel. When they are done here, they will advance to other places. It's already happening in Europe and the US. We have to understand that living here means decades and decades of struggle. The quicker we understand that, it'll be easier for us to accept our need to fight.
ואנחנו במגרש המשחקים שלנו, בעולם איפה שאנחנו חיים, צריכים להבין שהמאבק הזה הוא מאבק לדורות.
We need to build our national strength and prepare our future generations, who will be drafting into the military, that they too will have to fight. They'll face different challenges, but the core remains the same. We might be able to make peace with neighboring countries and pursue common interests, but as long as Hamas remains in power, we have a problem, and I don't see a way we can make it work out with them.
So let's look at the West Bank. Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, it's no secret, he's old, the oldest leader in the world. He's 86 this year. And you know, one must look at the future and say, what's going to happen when he's gone? It might be tomorrow or next month or next year. What's good for Israel? What's good for the Palestinians?
אני חושב שהדבר הכי חשוב שאנחנו נצליח להשיג כאן ביהודה ושומרון זה יציבות.
I think our best option would be to maintain stability in the West Bank. There's a paradox. To an extent, Israel and the PA have a common interest, and Hamas is a common enemy. If Hamas will take over the West Bank, then people who enjoy relative freedom in Ramallah, Nablus, etc., under Hamas will rule their lives and be completely different.
אז אנשים שרגילים לחיות בחופש, נקרא לזה יחסית, כאזרחים ברמאללה, בשכם,
Freedoms will be taken away. Religious symbols like dress codes will be strongly enforced, for women specifically. So I believe that Abbas and the people who surround him will keep cooperating with Israel. The head of Shin Bet visited Ramallah a few weeks ago as part of his introduction to his new position.
ברמאללה זה חלק מהתהליך כניסה שלו לתפקיד, זה להכיר גם את המנגנונים, להבין...
Getting to know the people and establishing personal ties to make cooperation even tighter, especially in times of crisis. So right now, there's more common ground between us than things that divide us.
כרגע המשותף גובר על המפריד בכל מה שקשור להתמודדות מול ארגוני הטרור כמו חמאס וג'יהאד איסלאמי לדוגמה.
But if there is one thing which is clear is that once Abu Mazen is gone, everybody will, the only thing which will unite them will be the hatred to Israel, to be against Israel, it's very popular. So they will all become extremists. And what can Israel do?
קודם כל, למדינת ישראל יש את כל הכלים היום ביהודה ושומרון. במקרה, בשונה מעזה,
First of all, Israel has all the right tools to deal with the West Bank. That's not the situation in Gaza. By the way, I don't believe it would be smart to launch a ground operation in Gaza.
ויש מצב שאין יכולת לשלוט מבחינה ביטחונית מצד הרשות הפלסטינית.
But in the West Bank, if we will have a scenario in which the PA is unable to control the situation, the Israeli Defense Forces can take charge like we did in Operation Protective Shield. The other thing is we have to support and build up the people who will eventually have to take power after Hamas is gone. By building up the economic abilities, strengthening the security cooperation, not the kind we talk about publicly.
אבל אני חושב שאנחנו כבר התמודדנו עם משברים עם הרשות הפלסטינית וחצינו אותם, ותראה, זה...
But in general, I think that trying to predict our future with the Palestinians is a bit dangerous for anyone that tries to do that.
שזה מסוכן לכל מי שינסה להיות נביא.
So anybody looking at us from around the world will ask you the question, do you see any chance that one day there will be peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
תראה, אני חושב שאם אני אשאל את הצד השני, אם הוא מוכן מחר,
I think that if I ask the leaders of the other side if they are willing to stop the military buildup, to stop terror, and to recognize the state of Israel, and to start educating their younger generation for peace,
שלושה צעדים פשוטים. הכרה במדינת ישראל כמדינה ריבונית.
look, a young Palestinian is raised to hate Israel. Their heroes are suicide bombers. They grow up wishing that one day it will be them. If that stops and they realize that they can have a good life, like Andorra, San Marino, or Liechtenstein, for example, those are demilitarized states with complete financial independence, and maybe in a few decades it'll be possible. The way things are right now, though, I don't see such a will.
איך אתם רוצים לחיות במדינת ישראל? איך אתם מסתכלים על הפלסטינים? האם יש לכם איזה אינטרס להיכנס לרצועת עזה, לקחת משהו מרצועת עזה?
Look, if you ask any Israeli in the street if they want peace with their neighbors, 95% will say yes. Ask them if they want a part of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, most Israelis don't care about that. Ask the same question on the Palestinian side, you're going to hear the exact opposite.
ואתה תראה את ההפך הגמור.
Which means what will I hear?
מדינת ישראל לא מופיעה במפות ספרי הלימוד של הילדים הפלסטינים. אנחנו לא קיימים.
Israel does not exist in Palestinian school books. It's not on any map. It doesn't say Ashkelon or Akko. It doesn't say Majdal and Akka. We do not exist in their world.
חיפה. כתוב חיפה ועכא. אנחנו לא קיימים מבחינתם.
We are temporary. If that does not change, unfortunately, we'll have to live on our sword, as they say.
אז אנחנו נצטרך לחיות על חרבנו לצערי הרב, וזה ממקום...
And I say that with great hopes for a better future for my children and grandchildren. But again, I simply cannot see it happening with the current state of affairs.
כרגע אני פשוט לא רואה את זה קורה. הלכה למעשה, לצערי הרב.
Adi Carmi, thanks so much for joining me.